Forgiveness might save your life. Forgiveness might save your family's life. And forgiveness might save your community's life. Here's one story. I know a woman who lost her pre-teenage child, wasn't even 13, to murder. And she said, I could have strangled that man with my bare hands and a big smile on my face. And one day she looked around and saw that her family was degenerating because they were so angry, so sad, so filled with hatred, they didn't know what to do with it all. And she said, to preserve my family, I'm going to have to forgive this man. And she did. And she even visited him in jail. And he never apologized because he took his own life in jail. But she still continued to honor her daughter, saying, taking the life of this man would not bring my daughter back. And so she actually started a position of fighting against the death penalty in the United States. And her husband never followed her along the forgiveness path. He continued with hatred, and slowly over time, he began to develop physical symptoms of stress and then deep stress, and he died early of stress-related causes. Do you realize the murderer of her daughter took a second victim decades later, and it was so long between those events that none of the medical professionals connected the two? But she did, because she lived with him and she saw the effects of non-forgiveness. And she's now 86 years old, and she's remarried, and she's doing very, very well, because forgiveness saved her life. And that's why I am here with you today, to talk about how injustices, such as the murder of her daughter, can damage the personhood of the victims, as happened to her husband, and how forgiving can restore the actual personhood of those who have been traumatized by others. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at our objectives for today. First of all, the husband suffered from deeply unhealthy anger or resentment, even hatred. And it's an important mental and physical challenge, and I want to talk about that first. Then I want to talk about if forgiveness can reduce or eliminate the unhealthy anger, and if it can restore psychological integrity. I want to talk about what the benefits actually are when people engage in forgiving, how we go about it, and how forgiveness literally can restore your own humanity, which was piece by piece taken from her and from her husband, so that you don't become a victim of the effects of injustice that happened to you. So what's the difference between healthy and unhealthy anger? Not all anger is bad. Philosophers tell us that anger in the short run is good, because when you've been treated unjustly by others, your anger shows you and the world that you should not be treated this way. It's not fair. And when you're angry about that, that is useful and moral. But what happens when the anger is unleashed and there's no way out of it? There's no way to heal from it. I have found that the justifiable anger, the moral anger, can turn into long-term deep anger, which is a very unwelcome guest in the human heart because it doesn't know how to leave. And it's that kind of anger that stays with us, that abides with us and becomes part of us and becomes deeper and deeper over the years. That is my concern for you and why I am here today, right? Here's an example. There's a review of the literature of 24 studies that said, and I quote, "We found that irritability, which is that hatred that continues for years, forms a distinct dimension with substantial stability across time, and that it is specifically associated with depression and anxiety in what they call longitudinal studies over time." Extremely low levels of anger, in other words, the kind of anger that's suppressed, because good people don't get angry, right? So sometimes we stuff it, and it lives in our heart silently, and we don't talk with anybody about it, and yet it eats away at us. Research has found that this actually can be connected with the development of cancers. It looks like I need some help from Itzhak again. Help.
I'm here.
How did that happen? We're about here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. What would I do without Itzhak? Thank you very much. Okay. Now, Itzhak, it's not clicking. It's not clicking.
It's part of the fun.
Okay.
Here you go. Click. No, not clicking. Maybe you can just press.
Let's see, will this one work? Yeah. Did that do it? Okay, we'll try this one. Okay. We'll forgive the clicker, it's all right. Okay. Other studies on anger show that if it's abiding and deep, there is a tendency for the immune system to even be compromised. And when that happens, you're open to all kinds of different issues, flus, colds, arthritis, and the like. This long-term anger is not a welcome friend in one's life. And sometimes we get that sense that it's a righteous anger. And if I keep that anger, then I'm strong and I'm going to be protected against the injustices of the world. But that long-term anger can actually turn on you and literally kill you, as happened to my friend's husband. And so when there is unhealthy anger in persons, there is a cure, and that cure is forgiveness. The practice of keeps jumping. Why is this jumping? Okay, here we go. Okay. Yep, okay. Forgiveness actually can be the pathway out of the unhealthy anger. Forgiveness actually can literally be a cure for the unhealthy anger. And if that is the case, then you and I need to understand what forgiveness is. So what is forgiveness? First of all, it's a choice, and that's what I like about forgiveness. You don't have to forgive when you've been brutalized by injustice. You don't have to forgive when you have the deep anger within you. You can find other ways to heal. But quite frankly, I have never seen anything as powerful as forgiveness, as a cure for the unhealthy anger that can infect a human heart. Forgiveness, I have found, is a moral virtue. And I have found that from studying Aristotle. And a moral virtue is goodness toward other people. Justice is a moral virtue. Natty talked about love. Love is a moral virtue. That is a giving to others so you care about them and nurture them. Forgiveness is a moral virtue of being good to those who are not good to you. What I like about forgiveness is that it cuts across every single ancient philosophical and religious tradition I have been able to study as a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And as you heard in the introduction, I've been studying this for 37 years. And I find that forgiveness emerged first. The place where it had emerged first in terms of ancient wisdom is Hebrew Scripture. It emerged in Genesis 37 to 45, where Joseph forgave his half-brothers. And what did he do when he forgave? They didn't apologize because they didn't know he was Joseph when he was a slave in Egypt and rose to a governing position. They didn't know, but he knew who they were. What did he do? He embraced them. He gave them provisions and animals. Did you ever think about it? Those of you of the Jewish faith, did you ever think about it that Joseph's forgiveness preserved the Hebrew tradition? They were in dire straits as a community because of famine. His forgiveness helped them to stay alive. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, forgiveness. We see forgiveness in the Christian scriptures with the prodigal son coming home to his father and the father running to him, embracing him when he doesn't even know why the son is coming home. The son might have been coming home to get his laundry done. The father didn't know. There were no cell phones at the time. But the father, nonetheless, was good to a son who was not good to him, just as Joseph was good to the half-brothers who weren't good to him. Did you know that in the Quran there is an entire book called Joseph, and that it is parallel with the Joseph story of Hebrew Scripture? There are some nuanced differences, but the point is that there was an outpouring of caring and love toward the half-brothers in the Quran. Do you realize that the three monotheistic traditions could sit down together and all agree on what forgiveness is, being good to those who have been unfair to you, and offering heroic moral virtue of care for those who weren't caring for you? All three would agree with that. We see it in the Hindu scriptures. We see it in Buddhism with the idea of loving kindness. We see it in Confucianism of not letting wrongs get in the way of relationships. Forgiveness matters in every single ancient tradition I have ever studied. We can talk to one another. We can make sense with one another, and we can decide to be good to one another. And in doing so, it might save our lives. So then with that in mind, what is forgiveness? I am giving you what I call, from Aristotle's perspective, the essence of forgiveness, what it is in its purest, deepest form, right? And there are 3 points to what forgiveness is that I think all of the ancient traditions would agree. First of all, you've been treated unjustly by others. Second of all, you get rid of something negative, which is the resentment toward others. It's the hatred toward others that can actually bring you down very, very seriously. But then, and here's where it gets controversial, and because it's a moral virtue, so forgive me for saying this about what forgiveness is, it is actually trying, in terms of being good to others, by offering kindness, respect, generosity, and even love toward those who have not been good to you, such as Joseph did to his half-brothers who sold them into slavery, just as the prodigal son's father did, who abandoned the father, took his inheritance before the father was deceased, and left the farm with no help. And the father embraced him. Just like my friend who lost her daughter, she visited the man in prison who had killed her daughter. She was exercising what the ancients told us is something worthwhile. That's the essence of forgiveness. But Aristotle told me that there's a difference between the essence of something and the existence of something. For example, what's the essence of playing basketball and shooting free throws? What is the essence or the perfection of it? Making 20 out of 20 shots. That's the essence, that's your goal. That's the perfection of it. How many are we really going to make now? okay? 8 out of 10 if we're pretty good. That's still playing basketball. You see, we're still playing basketball. That's our existence with basketball. But we have to keep in mind the essence. And so when you and I practice forgiveness, we know we should try to get rid of the negative, the resentment, and try to offer the positive, kindness, respect, generosity, and love, but we do not always get there. We don't always make 20 shots out of 20 shots when we're forgiving. Maybe the best we can do is get rid of some of that anger where we can't even offer kindness yet. We're still there. That is our existence. And in the existence, it might show up differently in different cultures and different faiths, and that is all right. So what is forgiveness not? Forgiveness is not excusing what the other person did. It's not finding excuses. Did Joseph ever say it was all right that he was sold into slavery? That he was thrown down a well to die? No, that was never all right. But he was looking at the personhood of his half-brothers, not at the event itself. He was not excusing the event. I think that's a very, very important distinction, because if we don't make that idea here, then we will consider forgiveness to be dangerous. We will say if we forgive, we're going to give away the farm, so to speak. If we forgive, we're going to lie down and the other will walk all over us. No, no. You do not excuse what the other did. What the other did to you was unfair, is unfair, and will always be unfair. Some, when they look at forgiveness as excusing, tell us that forgiveness is a sign of weakness. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, in 1887 in The Genealogy of Morals, said that very thing. He said, the only reason you will forgive is when you can't have power over another, and the only resource you have is to humble yourself and get round-shouldered and let the other have the other's way. No, because you don't let the other have the other's way because you are not excusing. You don't forget. I notice you remember in new ways. If you've ever had a physical injury, you can remember what happened, but you don't remember with the same pain that happened 5 years ago when you sprained your ankle. So you don't remember exactly how it was, but you don't forget either, lest it happen again. You can watch your back when you forgive. And here's what gets forgiveness into trouble a lot of times. People equate forgiving with reconciling. And they say, if I forgive, I must come together again in mutual trust with the one who hurt me. No, no, no. You can forgive without reconciling if the other continues to exploit you. But you can forgive from your heart by offering goodness. The other might not take it, so you're not reconciled. To reconcile is both sides coming together mutually in trust. Forgiveness is offering the hand of peace that isn't always taken. You can forgive without reconciling. And, very important, when you forgive, Aristotle taught me this, you always let it grow up with the other moral virtues. When you forgive, you seek justice. When you forgive, you ask something of the other. And so when my friend visited the man in jail who killed her daughter and eventually killed her husband, not literally with a gun, but over time because of the deep, deep stress, what we were seeing here is that she still wanted him in jail because he was a danger. She fought against the death penalty for him, but she wanted him in jail because he was a danger. She didn't abandon justice when she went into that correctional institution. Not at all. She let forgiveness and justice grow up side by side. So if someone is continually belittling you, you don't have to throw forgiveness away and say, I will forgive only when I get justice. Because if you do that, if you say, I will not forgive until I get justice, you know what's happening to you? you are giving that person a great deal of power over you. You're giving the person a great deal of power over the well-being of your heart. Do you want to give people that much power? Did my friend's husband give power to the murderer? Yes, even to the point of his own life. And so you can indeed forgive and seek justice. You can forgive and not reconcile, and forgiveness is not dangerous. I hear lately, well, forgiveness can be dangerous because of something called toxic forgiveness. It was written up recently in a national magazine in the United States called Men's Health. And I was interviewed, and the journalist said, can forgiveness be toxic? And what they meant by that is people in a marital relationship will forgive just to keep the peace, just to keep everything quiet in the home, so you continually suffer and suffer and suffer. I said, I'm sorry, but that's not forgiveness, that's appeasement. And there's a huge difference between forgiveness and appeasement. And those who use the term toxic forgiveness misunderstand what forgiveness is. Those who say forgiveness is weakness don't understand what forgiveness is. In this conference, I challenge you, when you hear people talking about forgiveness being dangerous or unhealthy or weak, ask this question of the one who says that. How are you understanding forgiveness? And are you confusing it with excusing, automatically reconciling, or with abandoning justice? My guess is any one of those will be in that equation. And the people are not condemning forgiveness. They're condemning a misunderstanding of forgiveness. And you know what the tragedy of that is? It then blocks your healing. It blocks getting rid of and cleansing the toxic anger in the heart. Misunderstanding forgiveness as weakness, as automatically reconciling, as abandoning justice, could kill you. And I don't want that to happen to you. So with that in mind, what's the evidence scientifically that forgiveness actually makes a difference? What is the actual evidence from scientific studies that this matters? And that's where we come in. See, the scriptures can tell you to live a certain life well through faith, and that's wonderful. I'm now a scientist where I apply scientific principles such as randomization to groups and give people forgiveness interventions and see what happens. Here are 5 different studies, and we have many more, but here are 5. The first one comes from Dr. Suzanne Friedman, who is here today and is going to be giving a keynote address tomorrow. Please show up there or I'll never forgive you for not showing up to her talk, right? And I'm not going to go into any detail on Dr. Friedman's study of incest survivors, which is one of the deepest, most profound hurts in the world because a father or father figure who's supposed to protect violates. That's much worse than being robbed by a hooded marauder on Jaffa Street in Jerusalem, and you don't know that person. That's hard, but to be violated by someone who is supposed to protect you is fierce. And I'm just going to say one thing about the study. Suzanne will tell you more. But all of them, 12 of them, came to Suzanne psychologically depressed. And at the time she was doing this study, the literature said, don't expect too much healing of incest survivors. We don't have enough psychologically powerful techniques to bring it about. Oh yeah? Suzanne met with these incest survivors one-on-one for about an hour a week for over a year, and they went to non-depressed status. And a professional I know who's an absolute expert in intervention studies of all kinds, whether it's psychoanalytic or behavioral or forgiveness, said to me, Dr. Friedman's study of incest survivors with a forgiveness intervention is the very best intervention study ever published of any kind in the history of the social sciences. Think about that. Okay? Suzanne is much too humble to have told you that, so I'm telling you that today. Okay? Another one was done by Dr. Gail Reed with emotionally abused women who were at least 2 years past divorce. And they had a lot of abuse over the years. And she brought them through a one-on-one intervention, and they ended up decreasing in anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and they ended up increasing in self-esteem. They ended up liking themselves. We worked with men on a cardiac unit of a hospital. We screened them for injustices against them, and when they told their story of deep hurt against them, the arteries of the heart began to narrow, which is typical of cardiac patients when they're very upset. There's less blood flow through the heart. They forgave those who traumatized them years before, and 4 months after the study, when they retold their story of deep hurt, their arteries stayed open. And Dr. Douglas Russell, who was the physician overseeing this, said, we helped their heart improve, and we helped them avoid sudden death and chest pains. And it's the first study showing a cause and effect relationship between forgiving and the improvement of a major organ of the body, the heart. Forgiveness improved the physical heart. We worked with terminally ill cancer patients, all in their 80s, dying of cancer, and so we only had a 4-week intervention with them. And they ended up increasing in hope for the future when their physical indices were all going down. How is that possible? How is it possible that your hope for the future is going to go up when you know you're dying? Well, many of them brought their family to their bedside, and they had a chance to talk with one another and to reconcile. And some of them have been carrying the hurt from their family for 40 years, 40 years. And they were able to reconcile with the family, and they knew they were leaving the family in better shape than would have been the case had they not forgiven. And our last one here, there are many more, but I'm giving you 5 examples. We recently published a study with men in a maximum security correctional institution. We examined 107 men. What percent of the 107 had major trauma of injustice against them when they were children or adolescents? Out of 107. 90%. Almost all of them. And almost half of them never told anybody about it ever. When I look at what happened to them, one man was thrown out of his house at age 12. His dining room table was garbage cans, and his bed for the night was under cars for protection. He was so enraged, he took it out on members of the community and ended up serving a life sentence for very deep, serious crimes. What he was doing was not having the heart surgery, the psychological heart surgery, to reduce that big ball of anger, and he was taking it out on other people. Well, we brought men through forgiving those who traumatized them, and they all went from clinical levels of anger, anxiety, and depression to normal levels. Right? Then the control group that had business as usual there continued to have clinical levels of anger, anxiety, and depression. They went through the forgiveness program, and they had the same kind of results. Both of them also increasing in empathy toward other people, which is almost unheard of in corrections. All right? They ended up having a softness of heart toward other people in general when they were able to get rid of the toxicity that had grown in their hearts because of the trauma against them. So then how do people forgive? How do you do it? We see Joseph forgiving his brothers by embracing them and giving them abundantly of food and animals, how do you do it? All right? That's part of our scientific way. I'm going to share with you what we call the process model of forgiveness. All of those people in these studies, including Dr. Friedman's, went through this process. All right? And you can go through it idiosyncratically. It probably would look different in Wisconsin in the United States than it might look in Pakistan, than it might look in Tel Aviv. But the basic principles, the essence, remember, not the cultural existence, the essence of it is as follows. First, we ask people to choose one person or one group who traumatized you, and to think about it and be sure there really was an injustice against you rather than mere misunderstanding. Then we have one of 4 phases. The first phase is what we call the uncovering phase. You notice we really don't talk much about the trauma itself. We simply identify it. Then you know what we concentrate on at first in the first phase? The effects of the injustice on you as a person, which can include deep anger, abiding anger and hatred, feeling shame, realizing that this anger has affected your health. You know what the most common health problem I encounter in these interventions? Fatigue, being tired. You see, if you're carrying around a big sack of resentment on your back every day for 40 years, you're going to be tired. That's going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect how you deal with other people. And one thing that I've noticed, please be aware of this for yourself, it oftentimes can damage what we call your worldview, where you can become very skeptical, very cynical, very pessimistic, very untrusting, where if you've had a bad romantic relationship, people oftentimes say, I'm never getting into another one of these because it's going to happen again. Well, not necessarily, but people tend to generalize to the world of what happened to you 10 years ago with one person and think everybody else acts that way as well. And it's not true, but you are left with a worldview that is negative. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve the fatigue. You don't deserve the shame. You don't deserve to wake up every day with a big ball of anger in your heart. It's not fair. But that's what we focus on, not on the trauma. It's on the effects. And then we go to the second of 4, the decision to forgive. And we ask, how's it been going for you in terms of healing? Most people, when deeply damaged by others' injustice, do not heal very well, even if you do the very best of psychotherapies. Remember what happened in the context of Dr. Friedman's study of incest survivors. What was the wisdom of the day in the mid-1990s? Do not expect much healing for incest survivors. We don't have strong enough interventions to do that, okay? And so we ask, how's it going? And it's usually not going very well. And so we ask, would you like to try a life preserver in the stormy sea of all these effects you're having called forgiveness? And we go through what it is. It's a moral virtue, getting rid of the negative and offering the positive. And you will not be excusing, you won't be forgetting, you may or may not reconcile with the other person, and you will not be abandoning justice. And everything you've heard about forgiveness that's negative, maybe we need to re-examine it. And when people say yes, we give a homework assignment. Would you be willing, when you walk out of this auditorium today, to commit, if you have a person in mind to forgive, to do no harm to that person by what you say, what you do, or how you talk about that person to others? You see, I'm not asking you to love the person. I'm not asking you, like Joseph, to embrace those who put you into slavery. It could be the slavery of the heart rather than the kind he went through, but it's slavery nonetheless. All right? I'm simply asking to refrain from the negative as we begin. Most people can do that, and then they say yes. And so then we enter the third phase, the work phase. Here I call it hitting the forgiveness gym, where you roll up your sleeves and you hit the gym and you become forgivingly fit. You do the work. And the first kind of work is to understand the other person through what we call the personal, global, and cosmic perspectives. The personal perspective looks at all of the woundedness the one who wounded you has had throughout that person's life. Most people who wound you gravely, did you know, usually have a history of grave wounds against them? That's very, very, very typical. We don't say look at that to excuse. We don't say look at that to let the other have the other's way. We're saying look at it as a truth, as a reality, a very wounded person. Then we say look at the global perspective, which is your shared humanity. You both, did you know that you both, the one who hurt you and you, are unique and special and irreplaceable in this world? I'll prove it to you. You both have unique DNA. There's never been another person like you on the planet. And when you die, there'll never be another person like you again. And it's the same with the one who has hurt you. You share uniqueness. You share something special in your humanity. You both, because you're human, because you're persons, share built-in worth or inherent worth. You both have worth. Even if someone behaves badly, their essence of who they are as a person is special personhood. The existence of that person might be taking advantage of others and hurting others, but the potential is there to live a stronger, more human life, actually, in that person. Your hand up to that person might be the very beginning of someone treating that person well, where you might be able to restore that person's humanity. And the cosmic perspective, we call it, is when you are a person of faith, otherwise we don't go there. If you're a person of faith, let's say you are a Jewish believer, we would ask this question: are you the one who was hurt and going through this exercise? Are you made in the image and likeness of God? Well, that's in Genesis 1. It's in the very first book of your scripture. And did you know it's even repeated in that first chapter? How often do you see repetition in Hebrew scripture? And in your very first book, made in the image and likeness of God, is repeated. I think that must be very important. Are you made in the image and likeness of God? And the forgiveness gym then asks this question, gulp, gasp: is the one who hurt you made in the image and likeness of God? And that could take months to settle into someone's mind and heart. Don't expect a quick yes. Oh boy, I'm glad that's over, thanks. How much do I owe you? We're done with the therapy. No, that can take a long, long time to settle into a human heart. The other is made in the image and likeness of God. We share uniqueness, we share inherent worth, and we share being wounded. Yes, you do. Those kind of thinking exercises can take a long time. And when you start seeing the other person in this way, as wounded, as having worth, and made in the image and likeness of God, you know what we see happening next? The beginning of a softened heart. Little bit. We call it compassion, where you're willing to suffer along with the other, as my friend did by visiting the murderer in the correctional institution. She was showing compassion for him, not letting him out of jail. All right? But the beginning of that heart movement is the beginning of the shrinking of that big ball of anger in your own heart. You see, that's the paradox of forgiving. As you start reaching out to the other in terms of who the other is as a person, as you begin softening your heart just a little bit, as my friend did by visiting him in the correctional institution, she began to heal. The big ball of anger starts to reduce little by little. And then we ask people to accept the pain. People say, what do you mean accept the pain? I thought you wanted me to get rid of the pain, Enright. What's the deal with accepting the pain? Well, I'm asking you to stand in the pain so you do not throw the pain onto others. As the correctional institution gentleman did, who was thrown out of the home when he was a preteen and he used the trash cans for his dinner table. All right? He had to stand in the pain so he would stop passing that pain on to others. And that idea is not mine. The idea of standing in the pain when you forgive was first introduced by Morton Kaufman, Kaufman, who's an Israeli psychiatrist, who wrote about that in 1984. All right? Morton Kaufman. He asked his clients, his Jewish clients, to stand in the pain so they wouldn't pass it on to others. And one gentleman, who was a great footballer, who was abused by his father, would always disrupt his own practices in football, soccer, because he was basically trying to take it out on his father. He bore the pain from Morton Kaufman's counsel, and he stopped disrupting the practices and began to heal. Bearing the pain shows you, as a person, that you are stronger than you thought you were. Standing in the pain shows you can stand up, not be round-shouldered, not having to take it out on others. Hey, I can take this. That's the beginning of the therapeutic process of your own healing as a forgiver. And once you're strong enough to stand in the pain without being crushed by it, we ask you to remember the essence of forgiveness, try to fulfill the third part of the definition by being good to the one who hurt you as best you can. Maybe a kind word about the person. Maybe donating some charitable contribution in the person's name without even letting the person know if the person's going to keep abusing you. Maybe a returned email or a returned phone call. It does wonders for your own heart. Right? You can even do this for people who are deceased. In one case study of Dr. Friedman's incest survivor work, a Jewish woman brought her 2 sons to the gravesite of her father, and she had a tasteful Jewish ceremony of respect for the deceased in front of the children, giving the children a positive image of her father because she said, he was more than the kind of evil against me. There was more to him than that. She saw he had worth. She saw he had a very troubled part of him, very terribly troubled, but that didn't define who he was. And it is in that giving that she experienced healing. And then we hit the final phase, where what we have here is called the discovery phase. Here we find new meaning in our suffering. Our suffering matters. You know what our suffering tends to do? It makes us more sensitive to the sufferings of others. And we find meaning in our suffering, that it has matured us. We've become more mature and we're more attuned to those who have broken hearts. Did you know that if we went around the room here and we had people at random tell their story of injustice against them here today, some of these stories would make you weep? The eyes of forgiveness tell you that. I know we're all dressed up in our finery and we say hello and how are you, but you know there are broken hearts in here. And when you forgive, you find meaning in that way, where you're more attuned to the suffering of others. You mature as a person, and what you oftentimes have is a new purpose in life. See, meaning is the understanding. Purpose is action. I worked with one gentleman who was in a jail cell for the rest of his life. He was a lifer, as they say in the United States. And he said this to me: I'm never getting out of here, but I know my new purpose in life is to help my cellmates to heal from the traumas they have experienced. It gave him new purpose in life. And when you go through all of this, then you discover the freedom of forgiveness, the ultimate paradox of forgiving, which is when you give goodness to others, you are the one who heals. Right? As happened to my friend, and sadly didn't happen to her husband because he did not take advantage of it. And so how then does forgiveness restore one's humanity? Many of you here today have a broken heart. And when you have a broken heart, I have found that chips away at different parts of you. Right? Here's one example. Your self-esteem may have suffered. That's your feelings about yourself. Well, we did a study of residential drug rehabilitation participants. They were court-ordered into drug rehabilitation, and they didn't like themselves. Right? They learned to forgive others from their trauma, and you know what happened as they forgave others and were good to others? They ended up liking themselves. Their feelings toward themselves became more positive as they reached out to the other. Forgiveness can restore your thinking about yourself, that you have inherent worth. You have built-in worth. That can't be taken away from you, no matter what happens to you. No matter how much you've suffered in life, that is not the essence of who you are as a person. I know that's part of your existence, the stabbing of the heart, but that is not who you are in your essence. When you forgive, you begin to know that. So you recapture thinking about reconstructing the worth in your own heart. Forgiveness can restore a general sense of trust. We worked with people who were hurt by family members, by parents. They forgave, and their relationships with others began to improve. You know why? Their worldview became constructed more positively. They began to see that not everyone should be mistrusted. And their relationships actually improved. Their trust improved. And we find, importantly, that when you forgive, your own sense of identity, who you are as a person, begins to change more positively. I mentioned the Gail Reed study of the women who were divorced. Once they forgave, they went in 3 different kind of positions, from victim to survivor to thriver. They began to see their identity as not just someone who's picked on by an ex-husband who tore them down. They now realize that in standing in the pain and being able to give the gift of forgiveness to others, they had a new identity of who they are. And they are now thrivers who will not be defeated by their ex-husband's behavior toward them. They will never be defeated by that. And so in summary, the beauty of forgiveness, when you choose to do so, in your own way, in your own time, can put back the pieces of your own humanity, liking yourself, seeing your own worth, trusting others, and having a fresh new identity that's positive rather than continually negative. My final thought. Will you choose the path of forgiveness and get rid of hatred, get rid of anger, or will you choose the path of love? What will you leave behind in this world when you die? Will you leave behind for those who are part of your family your hatred, your disgust, your deep anger? Or will you leave a transformed person, love? And do you realize how eternal love is? Have you ever thought about this? Here's my final thought. If you can give love to your friends and family members now, your love could then be passed to others in your family so that your children's 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 children, when you're long gone from this world, could still have your love living in their heart. Your love could be alive and well on this earth long after you're gone. But it's time now to make the decision. Will I protect myself and see forgiveness as weakness and not dare offer it because someone's going to walk all over me? Or will I stand in the pain, see the humanity that I share with the other, and offer love that can be unbelievably beautifully given to your family for years and years to come? I'd like to stop here and see if there are any questions, doubts, difficulties, anything at all before we move on. Yes.
My name is Alon Leibovich. First of all, I'd like to thank you for an eye-opening lecture and an overview of what forgiveness is about. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank you for an eye-opening lecture and forgiveness and what it's about, especially in within the realm of physical and mental health. I'm a medical doctor. I have a practice as a family physician. A great chunk of my practice is about mind-body healing with my patients. And I have two issues that came up to my mind as you were talking. The first is, how come such a great virtue that has such strong effects, positive effects, on human health, both mental and physical, has not developed evolutionary into something which is more dominant and more available in our day-to-day lives? We need rare and exceptional stories about Joseph and his brothers, or Eva and Dr. Mengele and the Buddha, in order to explain what forgiveness is about, instead of seeing them on the street, like anger and envy and other negative questions and the other issues. And the other question that I have is, how could I, as a medical doctor, as a family physician, bring the power of forgiveness, deliver that to my patients?
First of all, why hasn't forgiveness itself been embraced the way the moral virtue of justice has? Justice has been totally embraced in every society of which I'm aware. If you don't engage in certain justices, such as stopping at a red light when you're driving, you will be punished for that. We even have schools at universities now that deal exclusively with the moral virtue of justice. We call them law schools. Why has forgiveness, which I would honestly call the most heroic moral virtue on the planet, been so suppressed? I'm guessing here, but I think it's because we have been listening to the modern philosophers way too much. We've been listening to Friedrich Nietzsche and those who have followed in his steps, where we think the human condition should be dominated by the P word, power. And power and forgiveness are at odds with one another. And so often we have this sense of power and dominance over others. And I mean, let's even think of our commercial culture. We try to get people to buy things, and we make the hamburgers look much better in the commercials than they really are, rather than telling the truth. It's not that great. The idea of power, even slightly, even subtly, has dominated Western societies. And I think it's time we call that out and realize that that doesn't work. Because as Gandhi said, talking about power to power, if we keep taking an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. So we need a paradigm shift, which also includes correcting cultural misinformation that forgiveness is weakness, because that plays off of the power theme of Nietzsche, who gave that as one of his inheritances to us, that when you forgive, you are being weak. That's incorrect. That is a weak view of forgiveness. And we need to challenge that and bring the norm that forgiveness is very much a heroic virtue into reality. The next issue, how do you bring it into the medical profession? Just as I brought it into the psychological profession. Trust me, I never had any more to forgive in my whole life than when I started doing research on the topic of forgiveness. A firestorm happened. People told me I ruined my careers. People told some of my students that they will never get a career in academia if they continue following this ridiculous idea, okay? But once we started publishing, people started lightening up. And so we have to publish more of the mind-body issues. We have to do research on that. And the more we publish, the more it will be accepted. And so I think we owe the world to roll up our sleeves, get a little bit insulted, because I'm a poster child for that. But once you get the science done, a lot of people tend to relax more. So we owe it to the world to do that. And in fact, I had a meeting just the other day with some very heroic people at Nazareth Hospital who are here today. Hi, Frank and Christine. Okay? And we are actually going to move forward with this kind of thinking, okay? Which I think is hugely courageous. But we must do that for the sake of the world, because the world is steeped in power. Anything else? One here? Over to your right, Natty.
Thank you so much for a very interesting and mind-opening lecture. My question is, you spoke about the cosmic understanding, and you said it's for people of faith. My question is, what with people who are secular and are not a believer? This is one question. The other one is, you talked about Friedrich Nietzsche, and one should have in mind that his writings were misinterpreted by his sister, what we know today after they opened the archives. So we don't really know if it was Nietzsche himself who spoke about power or his sister.
Oh, maybe Nietzsche's going to have to forgive his sister. I think that's really interesting. Okay. You know, either way, people are buying the narrative. But let's take a look at the question about the secular person. Remember, we have three different ways of thinking about the other: personal, global, and cosmic perspectives. So when we have someone who's, let's say, an atheist, we use the personal perspective, seeing the woundedness in the other, and the global perspective, seeing the inherent worth of the other. That's biologically argued because of DNA, for example. And so we can go to two of the three, but we don't go to the third because we respect the worldviews of everyone with whom we're working. So, okay, they don't get that one, but getting to the point of inherent worth and examining the other person's woundedness can go a very long way. And let's face it, atheists too want to show a moral patina to the world. And so they are interested in the moral virtues. They just would not get to that level. Right? And with regard to Nietzsche, whether he said that or not, the fact that this is kind of out there, we have to correct it, no matter who the author was. To be dominated by power is a big lie. And unfortunately, we see it as protective, we see it as being able to gain influence in the world and money in the world, and it's not the way to live. Shall we end it now so we can stay on task now? Okay, so I'm going to end it here so that we can keep going. Thank you, everybody.